My name is Claire Donovan, and I was 38 years old when my ex-husband's new wife raised a champagne glass and thanked me for giving her my life. The room laughed. I didn't, because sitting 3 tables away was a man who looked like he'd just seen a ghost. And 5 minutes later, he would hand me something that would destroy a lie people had been telling about me for 6 years. The funny thing is, I almost didn't attend the gala. I worked as the operations director for a nonprofit in Charleston, South Carolina. Most charity events felt exactly the same. Small speeches, polite applause, expensive dresses, people pretending they were there for the cause when they were really there to be seen. I had already decided to leave early. Then I saw Ethan, my ex-husband. The man who had spent 6 years convincing half the city that I had ruined our marriage. He looked exactly the same. Same smile, same tailored suit, same ability to make everyone around him believe whatever story he wanted them to believe. Beside him sat his wife, Vanessa, the woman he married less than a year after our divorce, the woman who somehow became the hero of a story where I was always the villain. I should explain something. By the time Ethan and I divorced, most people already believed they knew what happened. According to the version everyone heard, I had become obsessed with my career. I was selfish, cold, uninterested in family, unwilling to support Ethan's dreams. It was a simple story. People love simple stories, especially when they don't have to verify them. The truth was far more complicated, which is probably why nobody bothered learning it. For 6 years, I stayed quiet, not because I was weak, because I was tired. Tired of defending myself, tired of correcting rumors, tired of explaining my life to people who had already made up their minds. Eventually, I stopped trying. I focused on work. I built a good life, and I convinced myself I didn't care what anyone thought. Then Vanessa stood up at the podium and reminded me exactly how much damage a lie can do. She smiled at the crowd, elegant, confident, completely comfortable. Then she looked directly toward my table. Some people lose things so better people can find them. A few people chuckled. Vanessa lifted her glass. So tonight I'd like to thank Claire Donovan for giving me the life I have today. The room erupted in polite laughter. My stomach tightened. Not because the joke was clever, because it wasn't. It was cruel, and worse than cruel. It was rehearsed. She'd planned it. The audience laughed because they believed the story same story they'd believed for years. The story where Claire Donovan threw away a good marriage. The story where Ethan was the victim. The story where Vanessa rescued him. I kept my expression calm. Years of practice made that easy. Inside was another matter entirely. Then something unexpected happened. A man approached my table. Older, late 60s, gray hair, dark suit, nervous eyes. I'd never seen him before. He stopped beside my chair. "Claire?" I looked up. "Yes?" He swallowed hard, then placed a sealed manila envelope on the table. His hand was shaking. "I think this belongs to you." I frowned. "What is it?" The man glanced toward Ethan, then toward Vanessa, then back at me. For a second, he looked genuinely afraid. Finally, he said 7 words that instantly changed everything. "I've been carrying this for 6 years." And suddenly, I wasn't thinking about Vanessa's speech anymore. I was thinking about what could possibly be inside that envelope, because whatever it was, it had turned a stranger pale the moment he saw my ex-husband. I stared at the envelope. For a moment, I didn't touch it. The ballroom noise seemed to fade into the background. People were still laughing, still talking, still enjoying the gala. But the man standing beside my table wasn't smiling, not even a little. He looked exhausted, the kind of exhausted that comes from carrying something too long. "I don't understand," I said. His eyes moved toward Ethan again, then quickly away. "You will." That was all he said. Then he turned and walked toward the exit. Just like that. Gone. I sat frozen for several seconds. The envelope felt heavier than paper should feel. Across the room, Vanessa had returned to her seat. Ethan was smiling again, relaxed, comfortable, completely unaware of what had just landed on my table. Or maybe he knew, because when his eyes briefly met mine, something changed, only for a second. His smile faltered, the tiniest crack. Then it disappeared. I looked down at the envelope. My name was written across the front, not typed, handwritten, in blue ink, Claire Donovan. The handwriting meant nothing to me, but the date written underneath did. 6 years ago. Exactly 6 years ago. The year of my divorce. My pulse started climbing, slowly. Carefully, I opened the seal. Inside were copies of financial documents, bank records, transfer forms, corporate paperwork, dozens of pages. At first, none of it made sense. Then I saw a familiar company name, Donovan Event Group, my father's company, the company I'd spent 12 years helping build, the company everyone believed I'd abandoned after the divorce. My hands tightened around the papers, because that wasn't what happened, not even close. I kept reading. Then I found a page with 2 signatures. One belonged to me. Or at least it was supposed to. The problem was, I had never signed it. I knew immediately. People recognize their own handwriting, especially after signing thousands of documents over the years. This wasn't mine. It looked similar. Close enough to fool someone casually looking. But it wasn't mine. The signature had been forged. I stared at the page, unable to breathe for a moment, because suddenly memories started connecting. Conversations, arguments, meetings, things that never made sense. 6 years earlier, I'd been accused of voluntarily giving up my ownership stake in the company. Everyone believed it. The lawyers believed it. The accountants believed it. Even some members of my own family believed it, because the paperwork said so. And according to that paperwork, I had signed everything myself. Except now I was holding proof that something wasn't right. My phone vibrated. A message, unknown number. I opened it. Only one sentence appeared. Check the final page. My stomach dropped, because somehow the stranger knew I was reading the documents. I quickly flipped to the last page, and that's when I found the letter, a signed statement, dated 3 weeks earlier, written by a retired accountant named Harold Mercer, the same man who had handed me the envelope. The letter explained everything. Harold had worked for an outside accounting firm hired during my divorce. While reviewing archived records years later, he discovered inconsistencies, missing authorization forms, altered filing dates, and one signature that failed internal verification checks. Mine. For years, he assumed someone else would report it. Nobody did. Then 3 weeks ago, he decided to investigate further. What he found terrified him enough to bring the documents directly to me. I reached the final paragraph, then felt my entire body go cold, because according to Harold's statement, the person who submitted the questionable paperwork wasn't Ethan. It wasn't Vanessa, and it wasn't a lawyer. It was someone else, someone much closer, someone whose name I never expected to see, my ex-mother-in-law, Margaret Donovan. And suddenly, I realized the story I'd been living with for 6 years might have been built on something far bigger than a rumor. It might have been built on fraud. I read Margaret Donovan's name 3 times. My ex-mother-in-law. Not Ethan. Not Vanessa. Margaret. The woman who spent years telling people I was selfish. The woman who always acted like she was protecting her son. The woman who had attended every divorce meeting she wasn't supposed to attend. My hands started shaking, not from fear, from disbelief. Because suddenly, 6 years of confusion began rearranging themselves into something that actually made sense. I left the gala without saying goodbye. I didn't confront Ethan. I didn't confront Vanessa. I drove home, locked the door, spread every document across my dining room table, and started reading, again and again and again. Around midnight, I called the number Harold Mercer had texted from. He answered immediately, almost like he'd been expecting the call. "I was wondering when you'd finish reading." I sat down. Why now? Harold was quiet for a moment. Then he gave me an answer I wasn't expecting. Because I made a mistake. That got my attention. What kind of mistake? A long sigh came through the phone. The kind you spend years regretting. Slowly, the story started coming out. 6 years earlier, Harold's firm had been hired to review financial records during the divorce proceedings. While processing paperwork, one junior auditor flagged irregularities involving ownership transfers. Nothing dramatic, just enough to require a second review. Harold reviewed it himself and immediately noticed the signature issue. The problem was what happened next. According to Harold, before the report could be finalized, Margaret Donovan requested a private meeting. A private meeting. My stomach tightened, because private meetings rarely improve public honesty. What happened? Harold sounded embarrassed, deeply embarrassed. She convinced me it was a family matter. I closed my eyes. Of course she did. Margaret's greatest talent wasn't lying. It was making people believe they were helping. Harold continued. She claimed the paperwork confusion would be corrected privately. She insisted nobody wanted a public fight. Nobody wanted legal complications. Nobody wanted unnecessary damage to family relationships. And Harold believed her. He marked the issue for follow-up, then moved on. The follow-up never happened. The file disappeared into storage. The divorce ended, and my life changed forever. I sat silently holding the phone, because one decision, one ignored warning, one unchecked document had shaped 6 years of my life. Finally, I asked the question I was afraid to ask. Did Ethan know? The line went quiet, very quiet. When Harold finally answered, his voice sounded careful. I don't know. Not yes, not no. Just enough uncertainty to make my stomach hurt, because there was a huge difference between benefiting from a lie and creating one. The next morning, I took everything to an attorney, not my old divorce lawyer, a new one, someone with no connection to the case, no history, no loyalties. Her name was Rebecca Sloan. She spent nearly 2 hours reviewing the documents. Then she leaned back in her chair and said 6 words that changed everything. This is much bigger than defamation. I stared at her. What do you mean? Rebecca tapped the forged signature, then tapped Harold's statement, then tapped several filing dates. Because if this evidence is authentic, she paused, carefully choosing her words. Someone may have altered legal ownership documents. The room felt suddenly smaller. Rebecca continued. That moves us out of family drama territory. I swallowed hard. And into what? She looked directly at me. The answer came quietly. Potential fraud. For a moment, neither of us spoke, because that word changes everything. Rumors can be ignored. Gossip can be survived. Even lies eventually fade. Fraud doesn't. Fraud leaves records, paper trails, evidence, witnesses, consequences. And for the first time in 6 years, I wasn't wondering whether people would finally believe me. I was wondering who was about to start telling the truth. Because once lawyers began asking questions under oath, someone in the Donovan family was going to have a very difficult time explaining those documents. And something told me the answers were going to be much uglier than anyone expected. The first person questioned under oath wasn't Ethan. It wasn't Vanessa. It wasn't even Margaret. It was the attorney who handled the ownership transfer 6 years earlier. And within 20 minutes, the entire case changed. Rebecca called me after the deposition. Her voice was calm, almost too calm. Whenever lawyers sound calm, it usually means something important just happened. What is it? I asked. A pause. Then, he remembers the meeting. I sat upright. What meeting? The one where your signature paperwork was delivered. For 6 years, nobody seemed to remember anything. Suddenly, everyone was remembering. The attorney testified that he never received the documents from me directly, never met with me, never watched me sign anything. Instead, the paperwork had been delivered by Margaret Donovan, personally. The room went silent when he said it, because that wasn't how ownership transfers were supposed to work. Not even close. Things moved quickly after that. Additional records were requested, emails surfaced, archived messages were recovered, and every new document pointed in the same direction, toward Margaret, toward decisions made behind closed doors, toward conversations nobody thought would ever be examined. Then came the deposition nobody wanted, Margaret Donovan. For years, she had controlled the story, the church story, the family story, the divorce story. Now she had to answer questions, under oath, with a court reporter recording every word. Rebecca later told me Margaret entered the room confident, certain, prepared. That confidence lasted less than an hour, because documents don't care about reputation. Documents don't care about popularity. Documents don't care how many people believe your version. Documents simply sit there, waiting. Margaret denied everything at first. Then the emails appeared. She denied those too. Then additional records appeared, meeting notes, phone logs, dates, signatures, timelines. One explanation after another began collapsing. Eventually, the questioning reached a point Margaret couldn't escape. Rebecca showed her an email, one she'd sent 6 years earlier, an email Margaret apparently forgot existed. The room became very quiet, because in that email were 11 words that destroyed 6 years of lies. Claire can never know how this was finalized. That was it. That single sentence. Not speculation, not opinion, not misunderstanding, knowledge, intent, awareness. Margaret knew exactly what had happened, and she knew I wasn't supposed to find out. The case settled 4 months later. There was no dramatic courtroom speech, no television cameras, no surprise confession. Real life rarely works that way. Instead, there were agreements. Corrections, financial restitution, official records amended, ownership interests restored. The truth moved through paperwork the same way the lie had, quietly, precisely, permanently. The strangest part came afterward. People started apologizing. Not everyone. Some never did. But enough. People who had believed the rumors. People who repeated them. People who never bothered asking for my side. One by one, slowly, awkwardly, the apologies arrived. Then something happened that mattered even more. The nonprofit board where I worked announced an opening for executive director. Years earlier, I would have doubted myself, wondered what people were saying, worried about old stories. This time I applied anyway. 3 months later, I got the job, not because people felt sorry for me, because my work deserved it, the way it always had. As for Ethan, I eventually learned the truth. He didn't create the paperwork, but he knew much more than he ever admitted, enough to benefit from it, enough to stay silent. And sometimes, silence has consequences too. The last time I saw Margaret was outside a courthouse. She looked older, smaller somehow. For a moment I thought she might say something. Apologize, explain, defend herself. Instead, she simply nodded and walked away. I watched her leave. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I smiled. Not because I won, because the truth finally belonged to the public record instead of living only inside my head. The funny thing about lies is that they need people to keep carrying them. The truth doesn't. The truth can wait. Years if necessary, and when it finally arrives, it doesn't need to shout, it just needs to be documented. And after 6 long years, mine finally was.